geography.
Everyone knows it. It's not Paris.
I spent some time in Arles. That's in southern France, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. All right. Well, I guess so. Let's get started. We can start off by introducing ourselves up here. I'm Seth Manukin. I'm the director of the graduate program in science writing. So let's move down.
I'm Alan. I'm the acting director. Well, Seth is on vacation.
Vacation is the term.
Right.
Umbrella drinks by the beach. That's
right.
What Seth's all about. I'm Tom Levinson. I'm the former director. And there you are.
I'm Chris Couch. I run the professional development end of the program, and I'm an alumna of the program as well.
And Tim Deshawn, I'm an
I thought how we'd structure today is we'll tell you a bit about the program and then field as many questions as we have time to ask. I think, Shannon, should I be re-saying the questions so that anyone watching online? Okay. So let me just start off by saying the sort of basics of the program. The GPSW is a year-long program, 12-month program, 2 semesters and a summer internship. It is not taught in a sort of traditional one class, one professor way or one instructor. Unfortunately, the people we have here are 80% male. That is not actually true for our instructors overall. I guess just the female instructors are busier than the men are. But in addition to us, we have Cynthia Graver, who teaches podcasting, Apurva Mandavela and Maura O'Connor, both of whom are thesis advisors. Deborah Blum, who teaches the investigative journalism unit. Who am I forgetting? Rahul Bhargava, who teaches our data journalism unit. Beena Venkataraman, who this year is just doing some guest lectures because she is now the editorial director of False Globe, which apparently takes up some of her time. And Marcia Bartusiak, who is doing our short magazine segment and our archival segment. And I think that's it. And then everyone up here also teaches as well, and we can talk about the units that we teach. The program is a small program. It's ideally 8 students a year, sometimes 7, sometimes 9, but we aim for about 8. And the reason it's a small program is because we believe very strongly and focus very strongly on one-on-one interaction with students. And in fact, just one-on-one interaction in general. We try and set up as many mentoring opportunities for students as we can, which is something we can also talk a little bit about. The way the year is actually broken up is you take 4 classes. Hopefully, you will only take 4 classes a semester. We always have some students who are determined to take 5 or 6. That usually does not go super well. So we advise people who are really determined to take 5 to audit 1. MIT does have very generous drop policies. So oftentimes students just end up dropping a course late in the year. So we have 4 classes a semester. Each semester, 3 of those are taken as a group. So the 8 of you will be all together. In the fall, those 3 courses are made up of 1 super mega seminar, which actually counts as 2 classes. It meets twice as often as a regular class. And that class is broken up into different individual modules. So the largest of those is news writing, which Tim teaches, and he can talk about that. We also have investigative journalism in the fall, podcasting, data journalism, short features, archival work, and the book review, which Alan teaches, and the start of the unit called the lab experience, which Chris teaches. The lab experience, well, Chris, you can talk about that, but that's sort of something that is one of the unique things I think we do around here. The other course that you'll take in the fall, which then extends also into spring, is the Thesis Seminar. So that's something else which I think is a little bit unique about our program. We do require a thesis. It's not a traditional graduate thesis. It's a 6,000-word feature story. And you begin working on that hopefully before you even get here. You're generating ideas. We just, within the last late October, early November, we assigned thesis advisors. Everyone has finalized their projects and we assign advisors. And then students work with their advisor one-on-one until May, when the theses are done. In addition to that, the thesis seminar meets every week. In the fall, the thesis seminar is actually broken up into a thesis component and also a feature writing component, which Tom is teaching this year. But that is essentially a year-long seminar course that focuses on long-form writing. We expect you to travel for your thesis, and January at MIT is called IAP, Independent Activities Period. But we hope and expect you to travel for your thesis and give you money to do that. And we have had students go to Hawaii, New Zealand.
Alaska, the smart ones go to New Zealand,
Yes.
Fiji, Hawaii,
Palau.
Palau. The
right.
less intelligent ones go to Yellowstone in January or Alaska and so on. So
Yellowstone was one of my students. He actually was quite intelligent.
she was very intelligent.
Oh wait, no, I'm thinking I was thinking of the wolf. Oh, okay. The two Yellowstones,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Double down on your errors.
Then in the spring, the advanced science writing seminar, the mega seminar that met in the fall, is now just one course. Alan does a lot of that course. He does essay writing and opinion writing. There are some other components of that course, of the spring course as well. The thesis seminar meets, and we also have a documentary film class that produces documentaries that end up looking pretty great. Tom teaches that class, and he can talk a little bit more about that. You can also see those online on our YouTube page. You can check out some of those documentaries. So before we talk about some of these specific units, just a couple of things I want to touch on. As I mentioned, one of the things we take very seriously here is mentorship. And to that end, over the last several years, we, and largely Chris, has set up an alumni mentoring program.
And Shannon.
And Shannon. Well, actually, I should just say, everything that happens here is, if not an and Shannon, primarily Shannon. Without Shannon, the wheels would fall off of this whole operation in about 8 minutes. As you will find way before you get here, even just when you start thinking about applying, many have been the times when I wanted to call Shannon about something in my house or my own life and realize, no, that actually is not her job. She just does that for the GPSW. But Shannon also, in addition to all those services, has a dog that she brings in fairly frequently, a puppy, which is sort of like a antidepressant service that we provide free of cost. So you get assigned a mentor before you arrive, an alumni mentor. We make those pairings based on interests, career, what you want to do in your career, what subjects you're interested in. And one of the reasons we do that is because we feel that the whole field of science writing has changed pretty dramatically in the last decade. Whereas a decade ago, it was fairly common for students to graduate and get staff jobs, and so be in a community right away. It's much more common now that students are freelancing. And writing is difficult and lonely in the best of times. Freelancing can be even more so, and so to whatever extent we can help establish a community that you're a part of, that you can both look to for support and also to ask questions, to get advice, is something that we hope to be able to foster. Along those lines, your first assignment is a profile of one of the Knight Science Journalism Fellows. Do you guys know about, just since everyone didn't nod their head, I'll just explain what that is. So the Knight Science Journalism Fellowship is a year-long fellowship for mid-career science journalists. Also takes place at MIT. And they have 10 fellows a year. And so your first assignment when you get here is writing a profile of a fellow. And both the fellows and you go into that knowing that, similar to the alumni mentor pairing, we're pairing you with someone who we think is going to be a good match for your interests, your career path, and we hope that that's a relationship that will continue. We have less sway with the Knights than we do with our own alumni, but that's something that has, I think, worked out really well since we started doing that. That's also something we implemented a couple of years ago. The other thing I'll say about that is our alumni network and just our community is a very close one, and you will remain a part of this community after you leave. We had a retirement party along with our graduation for one of our instructors a couple weeks ago. I think, 60 or 70 former students came. And given that we only have 8 a year, and we've only been around since 15 years total.
Well, something
First
like that.
class graduated 2003.
So a little over 15 now, yeah. But so that's a high percentage of our total students, and obviously they don't all live in Boston, and that was really cool to see. My favorite moment from that night was one class, 6 out of 8 of the members of that class walked in together astride as if they were in Reservoir Dogs, like just marching into the room. So that's something that we take very seriously, and even though your time here, we only officially get you for a year, but we are here as resources and hope to be involved in your career for your entire career. And I think actually next week's the Comm Forum?
Yep.
So next week we have 2 alums coming to talk about climate journalism. Lisa Song, who graduated before I got here, so before 2011, and Kendra Pierre-Lewis, who graduated 3 or 4 years ago, is now covering climate for the New York Times. We're bringing them here as part of another speaking program, and they're also going to speak to our class. Yeah, we try and keep it a pretty tight community. So, are there any questions about the program as a whole before people talk about their specific segments? And we can come back, obviously, at the end. Okay, so why doesn't everyone talk about the segments that you usually teach?
Okay, well, hi everybody. I'm Alan Lightman, and I teach. I teach a couple of specialized courses in the fall that I call numerical literacy, which are the quantitative methods that a science writer should have. How to estimate things, how to do analogies, how to evaluate statistical significance of claims. Then I also teach the essay classes, which, unlike regular journalism, where you're the fly on the wall and you're reporting on something that you see totally objectively, and you keep yourself out of the piece. In an essay, you put yourself in the middle of the piece. And so it's a different kind of writing. It's also probably the most literary kind of nonfiction writing. All of the different types of writing that Seth mentioned, going from journalism to podcasts to films to essay writing, I think of them as different tools in your toolbox. And once you get out into the professional world, and some of you may already be professionals now, you will at different times have to take out different tools of your toolbox. So we try to give you a broad range of tools here. So I'll just say two things about the essay, and then I'll pass it to Tom. The two central aspects of the essay are, number one, which I just mentioned, you put yourself in the essay. It's you're looking at some issue in the world, but you're filtering it through your own experiences. And the other main feature of the essay is that it needs to have a big idea, a question that you, the essayist, are struggling with. So I will now pass this on to Tom.
Okay. So I'm Tom Levinson. I am both a writer and a filmmaker. And in the fall, I've been teaching the last couple of years the what we call narrative nonfiction, which is the shorter long-form feature that we do in the fall. That's both a sort of standalone project to try and help you develop feature writing skills, and frankly is sort of preparation in a bunch of ways, not just in terms of the explicit skills, but sort of the emotional reality of writing a long-form project that takes a long time to research, takes a long time to think through, and then a long time to craft into prose that you want to show other people. And that's, the second iteration of that is your thesis. So, I mean, it's both its own thing and preparation for that other larger year-long project. And if you've taken nonfiction writing classes before, or seen them on TV or something, the basic idea is the same. It's a combination of a certain amount of reading exemplary works and dissecting them to try and understand how they work and what their elements are and what you'll need to do to put one together of your own. And then working through spending a fair amount of time, again, which we hope begins in the summer before you arrive, a fair amount of time developing ideas and thinking about what it means to have an idea that you want to work on at that scale. It both needs to sustain that kind of work, and you need to be sustained through it. You got to care about something you're going to work on for 3 months or 6 months or years or whatever it may be. And then, then there's the sort of series of steps to produce the finished project. There are interim deliverables as we ask you to write different elements of the piece, and then we start working through drafts, and those get workshopped. We workshop in a variety. I mean, different instructors workshop different ways, but I use a variety of peer workshopping in small groups, and then whole group classroom workshopping with hopefully a directed focus onto the particular issues raised in each stage of the process. So that's it's a very demanding project, and it's one of the aspects of our program is that we try and simulate the real world in a protected environment. And one of the issues of the real world is that particularly if you're out there freelancing, you're multitasking. You're juggling projects at different stages of completion, all that sort of stuff. And that happens within the program. And it's one of the most emotionally demanding parts of it. We always say November is a particularly exciting month because lots of different things are coming due, revisions on things that you did a month ago, new copy, the thesis, development of the thesis, nearing finishing on the narrative nonfiction, shorter feature, and so forth. It's all happening at once. It's very demanding. We've gotten everybody through it so far, so we think, it's a test to not quite destruction kind of exercise. But it very much is it is, one of our very best students in the first year that I taught here came back a few years later and said, this was absolutely just a great thing I did with my life, but the greatest thing was when I got to get my diploma and not do it anymore. And there's a certain amount, I hope there are lots of pleasures along the way, and I think there are, but there's certainly an element of that. The other thing I do is teach the Making Documentary class in the spring. It is in some ways not your typical filmmaking class. You certainly get exposed to all the technical sides of the craft, but the emphasis is very strongly on production, which is a creative act. So you produce, direct, and write in small groups. And the idea is really to give you a sense of both how such projects need to be undertaken from beginning to end, what it actually takes to bring all these different resources together and come out with a creative work at the end of it. And the goal is certainly both to excite you about filmmaking, to give you, as Alan said, tools in your toolbox that as you go out in the world where multimedia is more in demand, that if somebody says, can you edit, you can say yes confidently, and can you shoot something, you can say yes. But it is obliquely really a way to make you a better writer, whatever genre or medium you write in, whether it's audio, video, prose, some combination thereof, because the storytelling demands and the narrative organization and construction demands of video are in some ways sort of the same demands you need for any other piece of any work in any of these creative lines, only more so. And once you sort of go through that process once from beginning to end, you're prepared to do a great deal of things. It is, as I said, the final projects are all group projects. You work in teams of 3 or 4 to produce a 6 to 8 or so minute, sometimes a little longer, fully realized documentary short. And at the end, you get support from a professional cameraman who's worked on all kinds of national and international productions. And hopefully at the end of it, you have something you're very proud of. Over to you, Chris.
So I teach a small section of the curriculum called the lab experience. One of the goals of the science writing program is to give you access to the curriculum and to all the resources that come with that, but to also get you involved in MIT as a whole. As it turns out, there's a lot of cool stuff happening here. So the lab experience is built into the curriculum in order to get you out there and give you an opportunity to actually see science as it's unfolding. So the lab experience curriculum requires students to do 6 hours within 2 separate labs, so 6 hours in each lab. You are welcome to find a lab either on MIT campus, at Harvard, at Tufts, anywhere that you can get to, hospitals. Somebody did a lab at the Museum of Fine Arts, the Art Conservatory lab. If it's a lab that's actually producing science, then great. So you get permission, go in, do 6 hours worth of observation, whether that's actually within the lab or following along with field research. 2 different assignments come out of it. For one lab, you write a profile, and that can be either of a person or of the lab culture itself. So if there is a particularly unique makeup within the lab, or if there's something that's going on that's sort of endemic to the way that that lab works, then you can totally do your profile on that. Or more likely, most students end up doing their profile on a human being within the lab. The second assignment that comes out is an explainer assignment. So it's taking a really tough scientific concept, breaking it down to a level that, say, an 8th grader could understand, but also keeping interest at the same time. So those are the 2 assignments that come out of it. The profile is due at the end of fall semester. The explainer is due in spring semester. Part of the assignments, and I'm sure that we'll talk about this a little bit later, is we try and help you sell them. If that is a thing that students are interested in, sometimes they absolutely want to do that, sometimes they absolutely don't. That's an optional part. So that's an option as well. I also do professional development workshops with students. So we do a freelancing workshop at some point in fall. We bring in alumni and do workshops of dissecting their work, which is what we're doing next week with Kendra Pierre-Lewis at the New York Times and Lisa Song at ProPublica. We've done editing workshops. This year we have a bunch of students who are particularly interested in video production, so we're doing a digital journalism workshop coming up. We're doing a digital journalism pizza night as soon as we can actually get it scheduled. So that's what I teach.
And Chris, do you want to just mention or talk about how your help with placing stories is not just for those pieces?
Right. So for any work that you produce within the graduate program in science writing, we have 2 people on staff that will help you to sell it. So Tim has set up a number of partnerships with several different publications, which he can speak to. If your piece either doesn't fit within one of those partner publications or you want to try and sell it elsewhere, students come to me. We work on crafting a pitch. We work on talking about what the landscape of science journalism is. Where would this fit? How can we sort of modify your piece? Sometimes, especially for the news segment, students will turn in pieces, and then by the time it's gone through grading and all that type of stuff, the time peg is a little bit off. So we'll work on figuring out ways to refresh it. So how can we pitch it? If students have other ideas, if they have extracurricular projects they want to take on and they're in good academic standing, it's not like impeding on their academic work, then they're welcome to bring those ideas, and we'll sit down and figure out where's a good place that this might go. That's become a much bigger part of the curriculum in the last couple of years, in part because it really helps to build a professional portfolio. By the time you're applying to internships, we want you to have a portfolio of really good work, and part of that involves, if you have a publication name behind it, it can be helpful. It can also be helpful if, say, you're applying to an internship and you can say, I've already freelanced for you 3 times, then that provides a pretty good argument that you're capable of writing work to their standards. So that's why we do that.
Yeah. And I'm Tim Deschamps. I teach this semester part of the thesis class with Tom. Things like structure and fact-checking and other things related to long-form journalism. And then the other big part that I do in the fall is the news section. And that's the part where we've developed partnerships. So in the fall, there are 4 different news assignments that we have, 3 of which go through a round of revisions as well. And the approach there is kind of classic newspaper style, because I think it's a nice flexible approach that kind of gets you to be economic with your words, and then we can build out from there and kind of get into more digital journalism styles in the spring, which is another course I'm teaching. The partnerships that we've developed this year are with Wired, National Geographic, STAT, which is a local health and biotech publication, Science News, Ars Technica, and Common Health, WBUR Common Health. So we've already been able to place pieces at National Geographic, Wired, and Ars Technica this year, and Science News. So we feel pretty positive about that. The goal there is, you write your stories for the assignment, and we try to get it in such a way that the news peg is a little more timely than some others, so that when it comes time to pitching to one of these partners, they're more receptive than they would be if the peg had already passed. And I'll go through several more rounds of revisions with you if necessary, and then that helps get it ready for when we pass it on to them. And so far the reception's been really good.
It's not guaranteed, though.
No, it's definitely not guaranteed, and it's certainly the kind of thing where if you feel like you don't have time for it now, that's fine. It's not a requirement for every assignment, but it's a good option to have if
It is
you want to
paid,
take advantage of
though,
it.
also.
Yes, and they are paying, so that's also nice.
We've also sold stories to Sky and Telescope
Sky.
outside of the partnerships, and we're working on the Atlantic, maybe, possibly.
Fingers crossed.
We're working on it.
Atlantic, yeah.
The Atlantic has published stuff out of the program in the past.
Yep.
Yeah.
Including, bizarrely, one thing out of the documentary class. How that happened, I won't tell you whose dog I kidnapped.
I sold a lot of my assignments when I was a student, so it is possible.
Chris set the record for most assignments sold while a student.
That still stands, I believe.
I believe so, yes.
Sorry, one more thing. In the spring, I'm also teaching an editing section. So sometimes you'll stumble into a job like I did where you're an editor all of a sudden, and how does that happen? And so it'd be nice to have, I certainly wanted more preparation for that when I was doing it, so I think it's going to be a useful class.
So a couple more things I want to touch on before we open it up, just general things. So as you heard, there are a lot of different aspects of the curriculum, and we only covered the elements that we're teaching. So the investigative unit taught by Deborah Blum involves putting together FOIA requests and then hopefully getting back that information and working with it. The data journalism segment is another 4-unit segment, 4-unit meaning 4 class sessions. The podcasting segment that Cynthia Graber does is, I think, since we introduced it, often one of our most popular segments. It's always a little bit painful bringing in instructors who are immediately more popular than you are, which I seem to have a knack for doing. But the reason why we cover so many things is because what our goal is for when you leave here, you can go into any environment and be asked to do anything in this field, and at least feel confident having the vocabulary, having a grounding in it. So we're not saying you'll go out of here and then someone says, will you put together a documentary on your own to air on Nova next week, and you'll do that. But if you go to a news organization and they say, we want you to be a part of this documentary team, we want you to work on this audio project, we want you to write a story a day out of this beat, we want you to focus on long form, whatever it is, we want to give you the tools so you feel comfortable saying, yes, that's something that I can work on and I can tackle. The other thing we really hope to do for you and with you while you're here is help you figure out what your own style is. Not even so much your own writing style, but your own working style. I spent more than a decade of my career trying to learn how to outline, because everyone told me that that's what you had to do for longer stories, that you had to outline. And it wasn't until I've been doing this for 15 years with no positive effects that I realized that my brain just doesn't work that way. So one of the things that we want you to do while you're here is figure out what your working style is. That means some of you might realize after November, you don't want to juggle multiple assignments at a time. And so you want to figure out a way that if you're freelancing, you can supplement that income with something else. Some of you might realize you love that. And that's what you want to do, and this is how you can manage it. So I sort of think of it a little bit akin to, I have young kids, so I think of everything in these terms. But you don't want to teach a child how to depend on you. You want to teach it how to be able to function on its own. And so we want you to leave here being confident that you figured out what works for you. A couple of other things to mention. There have been some parts of our curriculum that have stayed pretty constant, and that's because we feel like they're essential, and they're an essential part of what we are. News writing, the thesis, the essay. But over the last 5 years, we have added new units to the curriculum every single year. And that is sometimes in response to something we feel is important, but oftentimes in response to what the students say they want. We've changed curriculums during the year when we had a class come in and there was a particular interest in one thing or another. So out of the things that we just talked about, podcasting is something that's been added over the last couple of years. Digital journalism, editing, data journalism, those are all things that have been changed just in the last couple of years. The thesis seminar used to be taught the way most thesis seminars are taught, which is not taught. It's just a fake course that you get credit for writing your thesis. And we felt like, all right, we only have you for a year, and we want to be able to work with you as much as we can. The other thing that Chris touched on about the lab experience is I hope that you think that we are all great and want to work with us. I do think the best thing about being here, apart from us, is that you're at MIT. We have never had a student that I'm aware of reach out to a scientist here because they're working on a news story and be told, no, I just won't talk to you. And so having that sort of access is something that we believe is really valuable. In the same way that we hope that you can start to develop mentoring relationships while you're here, we want you to start to build your sources. And we want you to leave here with people who you've already talked to and you know you can go back to. That comes into play in one other thing we do, which I'll talk about in a second. Electives, which we just briefly touched on. Electives can be any course at Harvard or at MIT. And it can be any course at Harvard, their undergraduate or their graduate schools. One of your 2 electives needs to be a graduate level course. But we've had students take courses in the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, at Harvard Law School. So as long as it's appropriate for you and the professor gives you permission, any course at either institute you can take for credit. One thing that I assume and is going to be a big question that people have is paying for this. It's not cheap. Our goal is to make this program free for everyone. We are not quite there, but last year our financial aid exceeded the total cost of MIT's tuition, health insurance fees by about $13,000. So on average, students got all of their MIT fees, tuition, everything covered, and an additional $13,000. We would like to get that closer to $25,000. We estimate that that's around where it would need to be for it to essentially cost you nothing to come here. We're not quite there yet, but that's what we're shooting for. One of the ways we've done that is by, and this is a program that Chris and Shannon and I have worked on a lot over the last couple of years, is setting up partnerships around MIT with different departments and schools where our students work in those departments for 10 hours a week, usually in the news office, and that in turn gives you a stipend and also pays for a part of your tuition.
It also essentially acts as an additional internship on your resume.
Exactly.
So it
Right.
builds your resume, it builds your portfolio, because students come out and have clips from that. So sometimes that's either written clips, or they're doing podcasts, or they're working in a team to produce reports. But they also have the ability to develop sources as well
Right,
that they
yeah,
can use after.
It's exactly right. That's another place. We have students working in the School of Science, in the School of Engineering, in Earth and Planetary Sciences,
Environmental Solutions
Environmental
Initiative,
Solutions,
Energy
right.
Initiative, Department of Biology.
And so what students are doing in all of those departments are essentially working with their faculty and their researchers writing about that research. So it not only exposes you to that research, but exposes you to those researchers. No one should not apply because they're worried about finances. The way that we do financial aid is essentially we start out with a set amount and we basically divide it evenly. We don't believe that some people should get a lot more than others. And then at that point, we also work as aggressively as we can in applying for both internal and external scholarships and funding. So not everyone receives exactly the same amount, because some might get a fellowship or a scholarship. But when that happens, then that also allows us to redistribute some of that money everywhere else. But after we sort of divvy up the money we have, if there is a set amount that would let you come here, you should absolutely let us know, because we also have had some success going to either the dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences or the dean of the graduate programs and saying, there's a student that we really want to be here and we need $8,000 or whatever the case is. Doesn't always work, but it has worked sometimes. So always just let us know what, if there is a number that would make it possible for you, what that number is. That absolutely will not mean that you will top out at that number. We are constantly trying to get you as much money as we can.
The other thing, just one thing, sometimes people get money from outside sources, and that comes in after we've made our offer. We do not reduce an award because you got a $5,000 scholarship from someplace. Whatever you get on top of what we can offer you is yours to spend on trips to Jamaica or whatever it is.
Up until, I think, $90,000.
Yeah, or whatever the number is, but
Yeah,
whatever
so-
that number is.
Exactly, yes, right. You won't be making a huge profit being here. But we also raise money, sometimes, one of the things that we want to do with the internships is give students a sort of professional leg up. And so we also raise money that allows us to create internships sometimes with partner organizations that don't have funding for an internship. So last year, one of our students really wanted to work with STAT, which is a life science portal that the Boston Globe runs. They didn't have the funding, and so we provided the funding for that internship for that student.
We also have 2 students in environmental health news
Right.
that we provided funding for because they wanted to do investigative journalism.
Yeah, anything, and Environmental Health News is a nonprofit. So anything that's a nonprofit, it's even easier for us to provide money for. But we will try and do it in any situation. A couple of other things that just usually come up. In terms of background, that runs, in terms of writing background, that runs the gamut from people who have had years of professional experience, people who ran their college papers that had a staff of 100, to people who've never written a news story, were not on their high school paper, don't have any journalism experience. The same also goes for background in science. Roughly half of our students majored in a science, which means that roughly half of them did not. You do not need to have a particular background in science. We've had students here, we have one student here this year who earned her PhD in November, this month, September?
One week into the program. She
Okay, all right. So we've had PhDs and we've had students, as I said, who have basically no science background. In terms of the application, we also have had students who, maybe not students, we had a student who flunked out of college. We look at grades and GREs and everything, but that's not what is most important to us. What is like the top 10 list of most important things is writing. So we want to see your writing, and we want to see that you have a sustained interest in science. Sometimes that means, in fact not infrequently, when students are asked to provide writing samples, if they don't have those samples, potential students will go out and write those pieces for the application. That's completely fine. In fact, we would welcome that.
Can I just?
Yeah, please.
The writing samples that you turn in when you apply, at least some of it has to deal with science.
Yes.
That's essential. We have to know that you can write about science. Even if you're not a physics major, that's fine, but you have to be able to write about science.
But it doesn't have to be a published
No,
story.
right,
It can
no,
be
exactly.
something written just for the application. It can be a blog post. It can be a freelance article. It can be a thing you wrote for class. Like, it doesn't.
The other thing, just as a hint, is that, in addition to the writing samples we request, there are 2 required essays. And there are prompts for both those essays. But you should look at those as pieces of writing that put your writing persona on display as well. Don't just answer the prompt.
Right.
Craft it. Make it a piece that tells us who you are and how you think.
And if there are aspects of your application that you're concerned about, if you had one year where things went to shit and you did really badly in school, let us know. We're going to see it anyway, and so instead of our trying to guess what happened, just let us know, and we're a pretty understanding lot. By the same token, some people do really poorly on standardized tests. You will not need to take standardized tests as a journalist. So if that's the case, let us know. The more information we have, obviously, the better in all those situations. But in addition to what Alan said about writing about science, we also want to know that you have a sustained interest in science, that this isn't sort of a whim or a lark. And so if that's not immediately apparent, that's something you might want to, in one of your essays, you could talk about, this is where my interest in science stems from, this is why I think this program's right for me. I think that covers all of the things I wanted to make sure we
Can I
talked
ask about
about.
something?
Yeah.
I'd like to, and Shannon and Seth, maybe everybody here can talk about the jobs that our graduates get. Because we now have probably at least 120 graduates, don't we?
Something like that,
Some of that
yeah.
order. And almost all of them have professional jobs as science communicators in some form or another. And we have a database of all the jobs that our graduates have. And we really are aimed towards helping you be a professional science communicator, whether you're working in whatever media you're working in. There are not many graduate programs in science writing in the country.
Right.
And for a program that covers all of the different tools that we talk about, we think ours is the best. And I know that's an immodest statement, but
If we weren't willing to make it, you wouldn't want to come here.
I believe that we have the best general all-around graduate program in science writing in the country. And that is coupled with the fact that we're at MIT. As Seth talked about, this is one of the leading science and technology institutions in the world. And being here, you have the privilege of talking to, working with through the lab experience, being with some of the top scientists in the world. So that's something that's very special that we have here. Even though we are a humanities program, we're in the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. We are respected in the Institute as a whole, and scientists will talk to you. I mean, you can talk to Nobel Prize winners. We have quite a few here.
Yeah.
So that's a special thing about the environment here. Cambridge is a fantastic place to live. I think
Turns
it's...
out there are a lot of researchers in Cambridge.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah. But it's one of the intellectual centers of the world, and it's a great place to live also.
Just to pile on that, one of the other things that I think is not necessarily as obvious as some, I mean, it's pretty obvious that MIT is an okay university, but one of the things that happens when you come here, and particularly when you live in one form or another of institute housing, all the people you live with, you're living with then, the community you come home to each night are MIT graduate students across the entire spectrum, from science, technology, and society, PhD students to physicists you never see, or biologists you never see because they're feeding their experiments at 4 a.m. But that creates an intellectual community that's really distinctive. I just once, had dinner with the president of the National Academy of Sciences, who is an MIT undergraduate graduate, and he had this enormously distinguished career. Provost of UC Irvine, president of the National Academy of Sciences, this and the other thing. And he said the most intellectually stimulating time, the time he had just sort of like the most sustained, best conversations, was when he was a student here in that community, which was almost entirely, yes, as students you meet all the professors, but you talk with your fellow students. And that's something that really is uniquely ours and is not replicated at some other institution, at any other institutions, with this particular intensity.
You had a very different undergraduate experience than I did.
Mm-hmm. We'll save that one for the after party.
Yes, and far be it from me to say nice things about other programs. I do think that the other two
Major
science writing programs do great work. And I agree 100% with Alan. I think that we are the best program, and I think we offer unique opportunities here. I've spoken with students, and for one reason or another, they wanted to go somewhere else, and I'll always give my honest opinion about that. So I'm happy to serve as a sounding board. So I think we can open it up to questions.
Yeah.
One other thing I actually did want to mention. I was working on some writing earlier today, and was frustrated and had a fuck this moment, and then that transitioned very quickly to I'm never going to be able to do this, to shit, now everyone's going to know that I'm a complete fraud, and somehow the books I've written previously are going to get taken away. That is something that maybe there are some people out there who don't feel that, but I don't know anyone. I'm sure that if and when you're here, you will feel that at moments. But what I can say unequivocally is if you're here, you should be here. We have not let in a student yet who was not appropriate for being here. We accept you because we think you're incredible, and we want to work with you. The point Alan made about jobs, I think, Shannon, you can correct me if this is wrong, but I think every graduate who wants to be in science communication is. We have some who went to medical school who now are doctors, or who went on to get a PhD and now are bench scientists. The range of jobs runs from Kendra, who's an economy reporter at the New York Times. We have 2 or 3 people working for BuzzFeed Science. We have people at the Washington Post. I don't know if we have anyone at the Globe at the moment.
No, we don't.
We had somebody at the Globe.
Freelance regularly.
Right.
Yeah. Globe no longer has a science desk, unfortunately.
Right. Yes. Right. We have, and we also have people who work in labs, who work as public information officers in labs.
With people at NPR.
We have people at NPR. Yep.
Across the globe too. There are lots of people that have gotten science communication jobs in Germany and Japan and Italy and all sorts.
Chris did her internship in France.
Did.
She was one of the smart students. And our students have also done fairly well for themselves when award season comes around. My favorite time was when 2 of our students were competing for the same Pulitzer Prize. only one of them won. Yeah, so I think we have a pretty good track record in that regard.
Students are in a pretty wide variety of science communication jobs. It's not just writing.
Right.
It's also
true. Museums,
audio production, video production. I did 2 internships when I was in the program, both in game design, making science-themed games, which was super fun. We have students who are in, I believe we have students in interactive production, possibly. But they're in a very broad array of media and formats. So if you get here and decide, I really love the documentary portion, that's completely acceptable. You will be prepared to move into that as a career field. A lot of the curriculum is based around writing, but you certainly wouldn't be limited to strictly writing positions.
one last thing that we started doing more over the last couple of years is if students want to add another internship by having their spring elective being an internship, that is something that we also can do. As the number of staff jobs dry up, there are students who want to get involved with as many different professional environments as possible. And so that's also completely fine. You can get a credit for an internship in the spring.
One thing I would say is staff jobs are fewer than they used to be. They are not non-existent.
Yes, that's
though
absolutely.
the sort of where they are has changed a lot. I mean, there are many fewer newspaper jobs, many fewer magazine jobs, but there are.
But BuzzFeed has a huge science desk.
BuzzFeed has a huge science desk, and a lot of institutions are developing, very much more news-like public communication offices, and. As is, it used to be that if you went into public information, you never got back to news. There was a sort of change, and that's completely gone away now.
Yeah.
So
We should let them.
Yeah. So questions? Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. So you talk about how the advanced science writing seminar kind of the program as a whole led into these modules, kind of based on different skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, is there any formal division in terms of different topics or sort of focus areas within?
So focus areas of science?
Yeah, like say,
Right.
environmental versus medical versus.
So the quickest, easiest answer is no. The slightly more complicated answer is that you can't focus on the same area. So, for instance, your thesis and your feature can't be in the same area of science. If you have a science background, we will also steer you away from that area for your thesis and your feature. We don't have any strictures about news stories, but in the same way that we want you to feel comfortable dealing with all different types of writing, we want you to feel comfortable with as many different types of science as possible. So we might push you in one direction or another if it seems like, you keep writing about X or Y. That said, some people come in here knowing they want to write about medicine. And so then we might push you to cover different areas of medicine, but we're not going to force you to write about chemistry. The exception to that was we did have a specific unit about writing about physics, which we called Let's Get Physical. We have some pretty dorky names for our sections.
extremely dorky.
And that's something that we might do again. But no, we don't have specific assignments tailored to specific areas of science.
Should be paired with Let's Get Mental.
Let's get mental. Yes.
The reason for that also is because what we want to teach you is the ability to ask appropriate questions about any area of science. Because there's no way, there's so many subspecialties now that it would be impossible. But we want you to be able to pick up a paper coming out of any area, and even if you don't understand the science, understand what types of questions you should be asking. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, outside of media and journalism, do you have your alumni do work outside of that sphere? And do you actually encourage that? For example, like working in an NGO or working as an LA specializing in tech, for example?
Yeah, we encourage any career that you want to do. I mean, not like drug running or something, but yes, we have had students working for NGOs. As the landscape has shifted, whereas 10 years ago, a very high percentage of the students who went into science communication went into sort of straight journalism. That's now becoming not as dominant as it was. And we will help you and work with you regardless of what you want to do in that field. Yeah, absolutely. And by that same token, your internship does not have to be at a news organization.
Yeah. But certainly there's been I think there's a lot of interest in policy, and we're seeing that in our incoming classes. So yeah, I think at least, I won't speak for everybody else, but I think that obviously rigorous training in writing is actually rigorous training in thinking, which is probably a pretty good thing for a policy job, and we would encourage you in that area.
One of the things that Bina taught was a policy segment that we started last year, Bina Venkataraman. As I said, this year is her first year as the editorial director of the Globe, so she can't teach that whole section, but we're hoping to bring that back. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the general qualities that you think make for someone who succeeds and does well in the program?
The question was, what are the general qualities of someone who succeeds in the program? Is that right? Yeah. Other people should jump in here too. I would say that the biggest thing is curiosity. If you're not curious about a lot of different things, you might have a hard time. Outside of that, and a sort of dedication to both writing and science. We've had students who are the most outgoing people in the world. We have had students who are literally terrified of picking up the phone and talking to someone. They still need to talk to people. They still need to do interviews, but there's no one quality. Maybe with the exception of plays well with others, because this is a tight group. There's one lounge that everyone works in. You're working together on projects. So that's something that we think about. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
I think the ability to accept criticism, constructive criticism. I mean, we occasionally have a student who just doesn't want to hear anything negative about what she's or he's writing, and that poses problems.
That's true.
And we do try to work with you, but we expect you to at least listen when we have constructive suggestions. So that's a quality that would be important for succeeding.
I'd emphasize, clearly what Seth said first, curiosity is the alpha and omega. What Alan said is absolutely true as well. But to sort of reinforce Seth's second point, collegiality. It's not just that you're in close proximity, because you are, and that matters. Just sort of being, I had an editor once who said, does this person pass the bus station test? By which he meant, would you kill them before you'd spent the full night waiting for the next bus out of some small town? And it's a good test. But there's actually a fair amount of group work in the program, just as there is a fair amount of group work increasingly. You can absolutely be the lone book writer in your garret, and you might be able to earn enough.
It sucks.
It really does. But Seth is on leave this year and is doing just that. As
It's better to have friends.
Yeah. But the documentary project is a group project. The investigative journalism is a group project. and so on. I think data journalism may also have
Yeah,
collaboration.
yeah.
So there's a lot of joint work.
Even in news writing, where you'll go off and do the assignment yourself, you'll come back and we'll workshop it together. So
Yeah.
there's always interaction with your peers.
Yeah.
Chris, as the only one among us who is a student here, do you have any special thoughts about that?
Run, guys. Just save yourself. So the curriculum is tough. I don't think there's any getting around that. When I came in, I was a business journalist. I had 10 years of experience in freelancing before I came in. Even so, it's hard. I had never done an audio project. I'd never done a video project. You're getting stuff thrown at you from all sides. So, I mean, even if you come in with a lot of experience, the learning curve on it is still fairly steep. I think that the students who succeed are the ones who just ask for help. Like,
Yes.
when you
Yeah,
get
that's
stressed
great.
out, come and talk to, all of us are available pretty much a lot.
Yes.
There are more instructors than there are students, in part just to give everybody as many resources as possible. And so I think that inevitably at some points in the curriculum, everyone feels overwhelmed. I don't think that that's escapable. It's okay. You still get through. Maybe you turn in a thing that's not the best possible thing, but we're here to help you get from where you are to a better version of that. So ask for help. Like, it's not embarrassing, it's not a pride thing. Please come, ask for help. I think students who do that and do that fairly early have a huge advantage.
And in a way, that's professional training too.
Right.
As an editor, I'd much rather have you come to me with story problems early than end up with a draft that's somewhere completely different from what we had discussed. So just that ability to be willing to, communicate with peers, communicate with people who might be managing you, I think is really helpful as you go out in the world.
One thing that Shannon just reminded me as I was refilling, time management's a big deal.
Right.
It's hard.
But that does not mean you need to be an expert in time management. But that it's something that you'll need to deal with both professionally and while you're here.
Everybody's made it through.
Right.
So don't get scared that you're...
Right.
As Seth said, we don't accept you unless we think you can do the work and belong here and you're going to make it through. And we do everything we can to help you get through.
Yeah.
So you're going to make it through if you get accepted here.
Yeah.
The program is also designed specifically to create support systems. That's why we have an alumni mentor
Right.
program. It's why we set you up with a night science journalist. It's why we have so many instructors. It's why we have a phenomenal administrator in the back who has chocolate and a dog. MIT alone has 3 different dog programs where you can just pet a dog because you're so stressed out. It's
fact-
one of 3.
In this building, it's really convenient, is there's like monthly
There are puppy labs.
There's just right in the lobby down in front of the library.
Yeah.
These therapy dogs show up and people just go on one of them.
So everybody's
We
aware.
use them too.
Yes.
We've had a number of MIT undergrads come through our program, and something we often hear that we're much nicer than they expected, which makes me wonder what their undergraduate experience was like. But it is sort of an interesting combination in that we want to challenge you, and also we'll do pretty much whatever we can and need to do to make sure that not only that you make it through, but that you make it through in one piece.
Right.
I've sat down with students, and we recommend to students that they read like the New York Times and Boston Globe science stories. And I had one student who every single day was reading every single thing in the New York Times and the Boston Globe. And so we sat down and made out like a daily schedule of when she was allowed to read the newspaper. And we will, once you're here, we see you as our responsibility in every sort of sense of the word. We have deadlines. You need to meet them unless you ask for permission not to. If you don't meet them and don't ask for permission, you get marked down. But in general, if there's a reason why you need an extension, we'll give you an extension. Again, we're trying to mirror what you're going to deal with in the professional world. Yep,
I have a
Shannon.
question from the interwebs. Kev says, how important are GRE and GPA Being such a selective university, are the applicants for this program put under the same academic scrutiny? Can someone who went to community college have a chance?
So, should I repeat that? Yeah. So the question was about GPA and GRE scores, essentially whether we have cutoffs for those, whether community college students can come. We do not have cutoffs for GPA or GRE scores. As I mentioned earlier, I know not everyone might have been watching the whole time. If you feel like your grades or your GRE scores are going to be a reason for concern, and you have an explanation for why that is, let us know. Community college, absolutely. Really what we're looking for is writing ability. But there are no minimums or cutoffs or anything like that. We had a student who failed out of school. Did really well here.
Yeah?
For the writing portfolio, are you interested in seeing a variety of types of writing, or would you prefer seeing pieces that are only directed towards a lay audience?
Okay, great. So the question was, for the writing samples, would we be interested in seeing a variety of types of writing or just writing directed towards a lay audience? I think the broad answer, and again, people should jump in because I'm not the only person on the admissions committee.
Everyone on this table is or has been on an admissions committee.
Is that we want to see the writing that you feel best represents you. We are a writing for the public program. So if you have a piece of writing that you think represents you really well but is not directed towards the public, it would probably be good to offset that with a piece that is more general. But there are, people can write beautifully about very technical subjects.
I think that there's a big difference between writing a technical article and writing for the public. And I think that most of your submission should be writing for the public. A lot of what we do here is, and also we would evaluate you when you're applying, is we try to get you to think like an intelligent reader who's not necessarily a scientist or doesn't necessarily have a scientific background. And that would include things like storytelling ability, profiling of people, using numerical analogies when you're trying to explain a big number or small number.
Right.
Like if you say the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second, well, in a technical article, you wouldn't even say it's 186,000 miles per second. You would just say the speed of light. You say 186,000 miles per second, no one's going to, the general public, but if you say a light ray can go around the Earth 7 times in a second, that's something that people can have some grasp for. So all of those kinds of things would be missing if you submitted only technical articles.
Okay. What does sometimes happen, particularly for applicants who are basically coming right out of college, is they will submit 1 or 2 of their college papers. And that's not bad, particularly if they're papers that really sort of show your quality of thinking and the kinds of, your ability to research. Sometimes that's been very useful. Yeah. But again, as you already heard, if that's all we get, we probably can't admit you. We need to see you look outward.
Unless one of those college courses might be for science writing for the public.
Yes, well, in that case.
We've had applicants in the past, too, who have done writing samples aimed at kids. That is also perfectly acceptable, as long as it showcases an ability to break down science, capture an audience, link story, that kind of thing. We have a student this year who had a pretty successful YouTube channel, and she told me she was hesitant to apply because she didn't feel like video YouTube material would be relevant for an application, but that's
totally fine.
Not true. She's here, she's doing great.
Yep, and in fact, if you have multimedia chops and you've got multimedia work, please send them to us. That's a plus, not a negative.
some other general advice about applications is, and not just for applications, but in any situation where you're handing in writing, try to think from the perspective of the person who's going to be reading it. And by that I mean not just the writing samples, but if we have an application with 60 pages of samples, which we certainly have gotten, we'll read them, but we're also reading a lot of other applications, and try as we will not to let that influence us. We feel like that might not show great judgment in that regard. One other important piece of advice is ask the people who are going to write recommendations for you if they can write a good recommendation. We have gotten some recommendations that have been shockingly negative, and which makes me feel horrible. So when you're asking someone to write a recommendation, make clear, I want you to write a positive recommendation for me. And what I personally do in those situations is I give them an out. So I say, if you're too busy, I totally understand, let me know. And then if it turns out they just think I'm a total ass, they can just say, yes, I'm very busy. Yeah, so that's another free piece of advice.
A minor point, but surprising how often it can help. It can help you actually think about your own application. You know, one of the things that science writers do is they read about science.
Yeah.
And telling us what you read and why it matters to you is a really good indication of whether or not you're actually serious about this.
Well, then I would just give you the cheat codes.
It's true, but you know.
Can't trust.
Yeah, question.
So I'm sure somewhere in the mission statement or something, there's some sort of statement about what is science writing. Like, what do you consider, perhaps not the container, but any kind of principles or heuristics around that? And I think relatedly, I'm curious if there's any sort of ongoing collaboration with the Science and Technology program.
Right.
Science, Technology, and Society.
So, yeah, STS, Science, Technology, and Society is another program at MIT within the humanities. I feel like you've, on like the placards, don't we quote you about what is science writing sometimes?
We actually have a section on
We do have a section on our website, but I mean, for anyone who might not know Alan, Alan was the first person at MIT to be jointly tenured in the sciences and the humanities. He is, if I didn't like him so much, I would not like him because he's so frustratingly good at everything seemingly that he does, especially writing and physics, and writing both fiction and nonfiction essays and journalism. And Alan was one of the founders of the program. So I don't know if you had a specific...
Well, I mean, I don't have the definitive word about what science writing is, and I guess we're talking about writing now, other than not film or audio, but they're related. I think it is writing about science or a scientist in a way that is both informative, it's clear, and connects science to other things that people are interested in. I think that's important. That science is a human activity. You know, we human beings, we make art, we make science, we have love affairs, we do lots of different things. That's all part of being a human being. And I think really the best science writing, even straight reporting, connects science to the larger concerns of human beings. And we try to do that in this program. We're not just cheerleaders of science. We're trying to put science in a human context and so show what it means to our humanity, our culture, everything that's important to us. So that's my, a big view about what science writing is.
So our website description of what is science writing is not long, but the last paragraph reads, pretty much, you can probably tell Alan's influence here. Our program provides students with the skills they need to critically examine scientific research, as well as its larger social and historical contexts, question scientists and engineers without treating their work as immune to criticism, and keep the public informed about pivotal science and policy issues that shape modern life. So, come here, do that.
I would add that when I write about science, one of the things I try and convey is the sense of mystery and wonder. I think we would be better off as a society if more members of the public understood science and conveying, not just understood it technically, but understood the importance of it. And conveying the mystery and wonder of science, I think it can play a part in that. In terms of your second question, whether we have a formal connection with science, technology, and society, there's no formal collaboration. We are personally close with a lot of professors in STS. We certainly have steered students to STS electives. It's a great program. There are a lot of great offerings in there. But we ask so much of you while you're here that we sort of have decided we're not going to put more that's required on your plate. Does that make sense? Other questions? Yeah.
For the writing samples, when you say related to science, like what is your definition of related? Like, could it be like the diffusion of technology, like looking at the trends of diffusion, or could it be like talking about the development of that particular technology or science on its own, or does it really have to be specifically by like technical details about the science?
Short answer is yes. I mean, I've seen really interesting stuff written about the impact of the dispersion of cell technology across Africa, with social implications that are extraordinary. And that would be, to me, a science story. Similarly, a story about, the role of general relativity in making a cell phone possible would be very, obviously fascinating as well. And there's an intimate connection between GR and cell phones, or GPS, at least the GPS in your cell phones. It should have a technical component. There should be something that is non-obvious to a lay reader that you are explicating. It should have something to do with systematically making sense of something material, something in nature. I mean, I suppose material is too strong because there's plenty of really difficult writing you could do about mathematics that wouldn't necessarily be material, but would still be very much science writing. But it can, you can really look. And I mean, again, some people here may disagree, I think, but there's some, particularly when you start thinking about medicine and public health and environmental issues, you very rapidly get into areas where traditional scientific disciplines and social science have a strong interplay. So if you had so social science properly contextualized is absolutely part of our bailiwick as well.
Let me make a radical suggestion, which I haven't discussed with my colleagues here.
Go for it.
But and I would need their approval.
Yeah.
But I think that one thing we'd be willing to do, at least I would be willing to do, is that if you were contemplating writing something new for your application, and you're wondering whether it would be cricket, whether it would have not enough science in it, whether it be too technical or not technical enough, I think you could send us a paragraph.
Right.
Maybe
just
just
one
a query.
paragraph.
Yeah.
One paragraph telling us, would this be appropriate? And I think we'd be willing to. Would that be okay with everybody?
Well,
Shannon wins.
Shannon, what are you?
What do you think, Shannon?
Just a paragraph, yes.
Just one paragraph. One paragraph
size.
about one piece. One of your submissions that you're in doubt about. One paragraph about one submission. If you are concerned about whether it would be, in the right ballpark, the right level of technicality, the right topic, whether it's about science or art, instead.
We won't be able to give you sort of further advice other than this is
We won't
appropriate.
critique, we won't critique it,
Right.
we'll just give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah.
Additionally, you can also look to any popular science magazine
that's
or
right,
newspaper, and if what you're writing matches the level of technicality in one of those publications, you're okay.
I mean, one of the things we ask you to do when you are prepared, when you're proposing, for example, your narrative nonfiction feature or your thesis feature, is we ask you to give us models that have been published elsewhere that are in the same vein, not necessarily the same topic, but the same kind of thing that you're trying to write. You know, you can use that as a guide to yourself as well. In fact, it's a good thing to do.
But I think the advice of looking at pieces and looking at them not from just the eye of someone who's reading this piece, but how much science is in here, I think it can also be a good exercise. You know, I think oftentimes you might be surprised by how little or by how much science there is. There's a pretty broad variety.
Let me toss out one suggestion for you guys. David Dobbs, who's a very fine science writer who is loosely affiliated with this program, which means that were you to come here, you could drop him an email and ask him for help, and he'd be supposed to respond to you. Wrote an article for National Geographic a couple of years ago about approaches to blindness.
Right.
And it's a big long feature, so it's sort of roughly thesis size, and it has 3 major sections that range from quite technical genetics to basically social science and sort of, you know, a kind of anthropological approach to public health. And it shows you not just the range that sort of fits into one single piece of writing, but it doesn't define the entire universe for you, but it gives you a sense of how expansive it is.
I've seen a couple people glance at the clock. If you need to leave, we will not hold that against you. You've not committed to a certain amount of time here.
Plus, we don't know your name, so
Yeah.
you know.
That's another. And if you need to leave and have a question that you didn't feel comfortable asking or didn't get a chance to ask, you can always email us as well. Let's take a couple more questions before we. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious about this from a question that was asked before, but within the program, do you guys address the challenge of trying to reach people with science who don't want to be reached or who don't believe in science?
Yep. So the question was, do we address trying to reach people who don't want to be reached or who don't believe in science? The sort of broad answer is yes. I think I'll give you, the last book I wrote was about vaccines. I don't know if anyone's heard, but there's some controversy surrounding vaccines. And it was about the purported and inaccurate link between vaccines and autism. My goal in writing the book was not to reach people who already knew that vaccines were safe and important, because that, to me, just felt like cheerleading. And as satisfying as that can be, that wasn't the role that I wanted to fill. So what I sort of took as my mandate there was, I also didn't think, and I think this is true broadly, I was not going to have a lot of success in people who were on the barricades opposing vaccines. I think it's very hard to reach those people, but I sort of took as my mandate reaching everyone in between. And working on framing the issue in a way that wasn't saying, this is what's true, and if you don't believe it, you're a fucking idiot. I don't think that's a helpful way to frame science. So figuring out how to reach people who might be inclined to disagree with you, who don't know what to think, is something that we think is very important. And to address sort of another aspect of your question, and just to show you where some of our thinking is, one of the projects that sort of longer term projects that we as a program are thinking about and working on is placing science reporters in parts of the country where there are no science reporters. Because we believe, and there is also evidence showing that, for instance, on the issue of climate change, if you can connect it to people's actual lives, as opposed to telling people in Ohio that Miami is going to be underground, you're much more likely to have an actual impact. So, yeah.
Two quick ones.
Sure, yeah.
One, could you give us a sense of like how many people generally apply to the program or how you
Sure, yeah.
this basically? And then two, I wonder if you think there's space among the writing samples we submit for something that might be like a piece of like sci-fi or speculative fiction that sort of just incorporates that?
So the questions were, one, how many people apply roughly for those 8 spots? And two, could you submit fiction pieces, science fiction, speculative? So in terms of the number of people who apply, it's usually in the area of 60. Might be 80 one year, might be 50 1 year. It's hard. It's been very difficult for us to predict why those numbers move around. But I would say 60. Shannon, is that 60 is sort of a general ballpark? And we typically let in 10 and have 2 or 3 on a waiting list. Some years people get in off the waiting list, some years they don't. In terms of fiction, again, if you feel like it highlights your ability to write nonfiction about science, then that would be appropriate. So there's certainly plenty of science fiction that deals with scientific topics in a realistic manner. And that would absolutely be appropriate. But if it doesn't have that aspect, as interested as we might be in it, it won't necessarily help us make our decision. Either one. No, I think it was up here. Yeah, you had another?
Sure. Does the data journalism segment focus more on analysis, like school tools and things like that, writing R or SQL or something, Python, or is it more on the visualization side?
It's more on the visualization side. At this point, I think our data journalism module is changing.
That's in constant flux. Yeah. So it's hard to say necessarily, but yeah, right now it's more on visualization.
Most of the work is being done in Tableau for that section.
Okay.
It's derived from, the same instructor teaches a full semester course in the second semester called data storytelling, which gives you a sense of the emphasis and the sort of the theme of that module. You were?
This is more directed towards Christina. For the lab experience, how much of a participatory role can students play in the lab? Is it more of like observance only, don't touch anything, or can you actually engage in it like a research assistant, for example?
So that largely, a good portion of it depends on the lab itself and kind of what they'll let you see and do. For the most part, you're there to observe and to figure out what they're doing. That said, I actually did it was only one lab rotation when I was a student, and I did mine in a brain computer interface lab, and they actually let me participate in a study, and that was super cool.
You were a subject, right?
I was a study subject, yeah, which was a lot of fun. So if they'll let you do things like participating in a study or say like trying out a prototype or something like that, then it's like full, go ahead, go do that. But if they are like asking you to to do any sort of like organizational things, then like that's not why you're there. Like you're not there to help out. You're there to experience what you can and learn about that lab.
Essentially, if it's something that is a cool experience that you would want to do as a reporter, great. If it's something that is free labor for the lab, not great.
Right.
Yeah.
We had somebody get into mouse brains. I mean, like sticking needles in or something.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool.
Right.
Yeah, if they'll let you participate in doing an experiment or walk you through a specific technique and how to do it, then that's
gold.
A+. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sorry, but What is data journalism?
Good question.
So I guess data journalism is, the broadest definition is taking large sets of data and using it to tell a story. Anything from census data to tree height data to the number of publicly available data sets right now is astounding. And so the number of stories that are out there are essentially free for the taking, as long as you know what to do with that information and how to access it, how to analyze it. So it's essentially a form of storytelling where a fair amount of the primary sort of documentation is in these large data sets.
Just to go one level deeper, the data itself aren't the story.
Yeah, right.
What data, if you look at if you want to sort of see it operation, go to the 538 website, for example, or ProPublica,
Right.
and look at some of their data-driven stories. And you will see they have found one or more data sets that allow them to ask certain kinds of questions,
Right.
which in general then need to be made into compelling narratives by taking that information and then questioning people about, you may have thought you were doing X, but the data show Y, what's going on, or what are you going to do about it, and so forth. Data is not a substitute for reporting. It's another way to both do some primary reporting and drive the other more conventional reporting that journalists have always done.
But, I don't know if this has ever been done, but a random example, just because I was looking recently at a data set of trees per square mile, if you had that information and then also had some information about children growing up in that neighborhood, either what their educational attainment was or what their job history was, or there might be an interesting story there about the number of trees planted and how that could possibly potentially affect education level, data that's come out in the past along those lines. If you grew up in the 70s near a highway, you likely did much worse because you were inhaling a lot of lead. And so you can get information about who lives within a certain radius of the highway. And so there's so much publicly available data now, and there are so many interesting stories that can be told. Anyone in the back? No? No one else online?
There are.
No other questions online.
Some of them are things that have already been covered, although there's an interesting one that other people might be interested in. Are there certain scientific topics overrepresented in the writing samples sent with applications?
Oh, interesting.
That's a really good
Yes.
question.
So the question was, are there certain scientific topics overrepresented in the writing samples?
Environmental.
Yeah, but the only thing and we definitely have received a lot of environmental writing over the last couple of years. The only thing I would qualify is overrepresented, because that doesn't mean if you write about the environment, we're going to say that's been overrepresented. We don't choose you according to what types of science you're writing about on your application. So you shouldn't choose an area of science to write about because you think it will be underrepresented. You should write about what you think you can best write about. But yes, I would say overall, probably medicine, health, and environment are what we see a lot of, and that's what a lot of people are writing about. Those are important topics.
A pet peeve of mine that sort of flows off of that question is we get some number of applications every year, I think fewer in recent years than at some times, that are what I call perhaps unkindly sort of lost soul applications. And what there are these people who have, very often they're people who've been bench scientists or serious into science, and then decide for some reason it isn't right for them, and reach for science writing as a rescue. Now, there's a non-lost soul version of that. I love science. I came to university, I did more science, I still love it, but I really don't want to spend my whole life on a very, with one set of techniques or one area. And I love writing. I have always loved writing, and I think I can do, more in my life and I can enjoy myself more by looking at science more broadly. That's a really good argument. It's also made often, but we see that a lot.
It was a PhD who decided screw bench science, basically.
That's right. And John Timmer, who's the editor of Ars Technica Science, similarly. I mean, there are a lot of people, and it's real. That's a great bit of self-knowledge to have, and if you can figure that out early enough in your career, even better. The thing that is less persuasive is I've been doing science and I'm bored of it, and so I've decided to try writing. And you'd be surprised, it's usually slightly more disguised than that, but you'd be surprised by how close to that we've seen in applications. So, I'm sure no one in this room is thinking of writing that, but just in case you were, it's not persuasive.
But and even if you're not coming from a bench science background, just being able to articulate why this is something you want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, it's only a year. On the other hand, it's a big commitment.
Yeah.
It's a year that you could be spending on the job market, or you could be spending in another program. So just having an articulated sense of why this is what you really want to do, I think is always valuable.
I guess what I could have said much more briefly is, you should show us that you really actually want to do writing as well as you actually love science. You need to convey both.
Anyone else? Tim, do you want to say at all what made you make the switch from?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I had finished my 4th year in my PhD, it was in environmental science, and I had applied for a program that set me up with an internship at the Chicago Tribune. And to give you context, this was summer of 2008, when the whole economy was collapsing. The Chicago Tribune is a bit ahead of the curve because they've been bought out by a real estate magnate who was driving them into the ground. 120 people got laid off that summer, just in the time I was there. 80 of those were on my last day, but I still loved it, right? Like, every day I went to the newsroom, I was energized. I loved the stories I was covering. There was just something about the whole process. And so when I went back, I realized that I had been kind of leaning towards science journalism before I did that program, but that really swayed me. And so I knew I couldn't wait another decade, maybe, go through a postdoc or two, and then the tenure process before I could return to writing for the public. And so I finished my PhD and made the switch right after.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Feel free to get in touch with us with questions about the application process, and we'll get back to you. There also is a lot of information on our website, including you can see our alums and mostly up to date of what they're doing. We depend on them a little bit for that, but so yeah, check that out. It's sciright.mit.edu. And yeah, thank you all for coming in on now.